Thank you for joining us at Parents Corner. Today's topic is implicit bias. I'm Catherine Trujillo. I work for the Early Childhood Council of the San Luis Valley, and I have Francis and Deb with me. Would you guys like to do an introduction?
Sure. I'm Deb Benali. I'm one of the mental health consultants at the Early Childhood Council in the San Luis Valley. And I am thrilled to be here to do another Parents Corner. Our topic today is implicit bias, and that can be very difficult to look at and learn about. So we're going to go through this slowly and give you all an opportunity to really understand how bias can impact us.
And I'm Frances Echeverria. I'm also a mental health consultant at the Early Childhood Council. And yes, thanks everyone for joining us here today to talk about this really important subject. And we hope that you learn something. And we also have a lot of resources to share with you so that you can, continue to think about this for home and in classroom and all that. Okay, so let's get started. So what is implicit bias? Implicit bias is an unconscious bias, and it's a preference for or against a person or group that one is not aware of having, but nevertheless is communicated through statements, actions, or assumptions. So it's, again, something that happens unconsciously based on culture, how we grew up, our family setting, and different things like that. But it, again, an unconscious thing. But it does affect our behaviors and actions towards others. So why is implicit bias important? Holding an implicit bias towards a particular social group can determine how you treat an individual from that group or individuals from a group. It affects our behavior and can show up in classrooms, in the work setting, in the legal system, and just in everyday interactions that you may have in your own community. So the negativity bias can have a profound effect on your relationships. It affects your decision-making and can also form unconscious impressions of other people, usually based on a negative assumption. So what might this look like? Implicit bias is not limited to race, but it can exist also for other characteristics such as gender, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability status, and physical appearance such as height or weight. So as we can see, this unconscious bias that all of us have can show up in really so many different settings. And it's really important for us to think about, how it's showing up for us and how it might be affecting our behaviors and our interactions with others. So this sounds like a topic for adults. But this is a topic for everyone at every age. So it's not too early to start talking to your little kiddos in preschool, as infants, at every age. It's really important to begin these kind of conversations so that, again, that we are aware of how our thoughts are impacting our behaviors. So by 2 years old, children are aware of cultural aspects of gender and ethnic identity. They can understand words from different languages. They notice differences in skin color. They're curious about differences in hair texture. They use nonverbal cues to signal noticing differences. They may react with curiosity or fear. And they start to group people by, their own skin color and show that preference. And sometimes they have overgeneralizes some characteristics. So a developmental goal is to develop a positive awareness of own racial identity, to learn words for observations of differences, and to develop a comfortable awareness of others. So as you can see, this is just by 2 years old. Their kids are already noticing differences between people in many, skin color, hair, gender. These things are already coming up unconsciously. So now at 2, before 2, after 2 is the time to start talking about these things. So what now?
Being aware is the first step. Noticing differences between people is a natural part of being a human being. But because society so often marginalizes certain groups of people, like women or transgender folks, we are all swimming in our own pool of bias. Even people with very pronounced beliefs in equality and social inclusion will carry bias, often at an unconscious level. One of those being when we say we're colorblind. That is a bias. We should not ever be colorblind. We should very well be aware of what our friends look like and what culture they come from. Although the potential impact of our biases can feel overwhelming, research demonstrates that these biases are malleable and can be overcome. So, how do you overcome a bias? You talk about them. You talk about the differences. You talk about the differences with your children to help to educate. They've already noticed the differences. Now it's our job to help to build the acceptance. We need to practice how to accept the differences in our world. They're not too young to talk about race. Our children are never too young to talk about race. At birth, babies look equally at faces of all races. At 3 months, babies look more at faces that match the race of their caregivers. Children as young as 2 years old use race to reason about people's behaviors. By 30 months, most children use race to choose playmates. Expressions of racial prejudice often peak at ages 4 and 5. By the age of 5, Black and Latinx children in research settings show no preferences toward their own groups compared to whites. White children at this age remain strongly biased in favor of whiteness. By kindergarten, children show many of the same racial attitudes that adults in our culture hold. They've already learned to associate some groups with a higher status than others. And 6 and up, explicit conversations with 5 to 7-year-olds about interracial friendships can dramatically improve their racial attitudes in as little as a single week. All of this is research-based. Young children notice and they think about race. They notice the differences and they notice the similarities. We as adults are worried that talking about race will create racial bias in children, but the opposite is true. Silence about race reinforces racism because it lets children draw their own conclusions based on what they see. Teachers and families play a powerful role in helping to educate their children and develop positive attitudes about race and diversity, and give them the skills to promote their ability to differentiate about race and diversity. But you have to talk about it. So learn on your own. Get ready to have conversations with children. And here are some good places to seek the information and training for adults so you're better able to have those conversations with your children. Teaching Tolerance and the resources next to it. Raising Race-Conscious Children. Embrace Race. Teaching for Change. Aorta Cooperative. Fortify Community Health, and the Delaware Valley Association for the Education of Young Children are all great resources to help you learn the skills to be able to talk to your children. Next slide. And this is an anti-bias curriculum, Tools for Empowering Young Children. And it's the cultural differences and similarities with the ages. Age 2, they're aware of the cultural aspects. The developmental goal for a child at the age of 2 is to help them see themselves as part of a family or a group. Ages 3 and 4, understanding cultural identity as it relates to their family. They know one has individuality, and they also know they have a group connection. I'm going to skip down to the developmental goal. For white children to counter the developing belief that the dominant white culture is superior to other ways of life, and for children of color to build a positive sense of person and group identity, to see themselves as of equal value to others. Those are the developmental goals for 3 and 4 years old that you want to teach your children. Age 5, they begin to make connections between their individual and family cultural identity and a larger cultural ethnic group. The developmental goal for that age group is to understand the broader context of how individuals and families relate to the larger community, to begin to identify bias and find ways to take action to challenge and change injustice. These ages may seem very young, but now is the time to start to educate our children about the cultural differences and similarities. Age 6, we begin to understand that others also have an ethnic identity as they understand their own emerging group identity. The developmental goal for ages 6 is the same goal for age 5, to help to understand a broader context of how we fit in, how families fit into a larger community, and to identify biases that exist and to take action to challenge and change them. Ages 7 and 8, they begin and can understand how they can have many different aspects of identity and still be one person. So the developmental goal for 7 and 8 is to begin to understand why some cultures are valued more than others. And this is a great resource. Being Black is not a risk factor, and it's a strength-based look at the state of the Black child. It's a focus on children who are expected to do poorly based on risk factors, like poverty, but do well, and those who are expected to do well based on lack of risk factors, like affluent children, but do not, is at the core of the resilience paradigm. Increased efforts to understand the role of resilience in child development have been central to asking questions such as, Why are some children who grow up in high-risk environments able to cope with challenges successfully while others are not? And why are the protective systems of an individual, or what are the protective systems of an individual and of the social, cultural, and religious contexts? And I have to say, as a therapist and clinician, I've asked these questions to myself. What determines resiliency in a child that makes them successful? Okay. And so, two important vital assumptions should serve as priorities to guide our actions. We must have, one, faith that our children can grow up strong, and two, confidence that our community's cultural essence can be a contributor to children's growth and development.
So ways to promote acceptance. So talk to about how we are all different and how we were all the same. Have conversations at home. Have conversations when you're out in public. When your children are asking questions, don't be afraid to answer them. But we also want to be careful with the language that we use and the context in which we use it. And those resources earlier that Deb had mentioned are a good place to start to think about what type of language we should be using or shouldn't be using. Provide materials that represent the children's culture, language, and visual representation of their person. So essentially, we want to see ourselves out in the world. We want to see a representation of who we are, maybe what we look like, our sexual orientation. We want to see that out in the world. And promoting that within your own home is a good place to start. We do promote that in early childhood in the classrooms by having multicultural books, dolls that represent all ethnicities. So this is something to think about. Are you represented within your home inclusively? Invite all groups of differing demographics to come together and work towards a common goal. And a good place to maybe start this would be inviting some neighbors over for a barbecue, joining one of your clubs at school. Exposure and curiosity about others will expand your knowledge and acceptance towards others. So get to know others, ask questions, befriend your neighbor or someone that's different than you. And steps towards anti-bias can help promote anti-racism. And anti-racism refers to a form of action against racial hatred, bias, race, and suspicion of marginalized groups. Anti-racism is usually structured around conscious efforts and deliberate actions to provide equitable opportunities for all people on an individual and systematic level. All right, these steps can also help promote justice by making systemic change. And in looking at this slide, we have equality in the first one on the left. The assumption is that everyone benefits from the same supports. So they get equal treatment. But as we can see, that's not beneficial for everyone. So equity is the middle one. Everyone gets the supports they need. This is the concept of affirmative action. So they all got what they need to be able to see over the fence. And the difference between this one and the last one, which is justice, all three can see the game without supports or accommodations because the causes of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier was removed. So they were all treated, the barrier was taken away and they don't need that support because they are all equal. steps towards anti-bias can help diminish labeling. So stereotyping, having labels, or getting put into a group with a label, which we see quite frequently. We know that not all people that look the same are the same. So we're trying to avoid the children using those labels. And we're down to our resources. The following resource is an implicit bias test. So you can go to implicit.harvard.edu. And I just kind of circled here the steps to trying this. This would be your first step to being aware of what your biases are and how they may impact your life. So you'd go up into the login and click on there, enter your email address, and note that this is a free resource. Then down at the bottom, you could read through the data, the important disclaimer, and then here at the bottom, you would click that you wish to proceed. And you will fill out your demographics and click the submit button. And then here are some of the different tests that they have. And really, I would encourage you to pick the ones that are meaningful for you or stand out to you that you would like to try out. They have skin tone, age, race, weight, disability. And we often find that we're kind of shocked by the results of the test. And I don't want anybody to get stuck on feeling like they took the test and now they feel like they're just have all these bias, but it's to be aware of it so you can take a step towards not allowing that to influence your everyday life. So that was the end of our slideshow for today.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. I do just want to echo what Catherine finished with, that these biases are unconscious and everyone has them. So it does not make you a bad person or anything to have a bias. It's really to just take time to reflect about how this could impact how you treat people, how you talk to people. And it's okay. Like I said, everyone has implicit biases. So really it's okay. It's just starting to become more aware and to talk about them. So thank you, everyone.
And I want to thank everyone too. And I think Catherine and Francis have summed it up beautifully. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. And we know this was a tough subject, so we're glad to do this. Yeah. We will see you next time. I think we are going to do grief and loss for our next video. So we look forward to doing that as well.
Yeah. And if you ever have any questions, please reach out to us. You can, we're located at the Early Childhood Council. Just give us a call.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.